Good morning, everybody. To this, our first EGGSA meeting of 2025. Just some housekeeping. Please make sure that your volume is muted. It's on the bottom left-hand corner of the screen. And just be careful of what is moving in the background, because we can all see what is happening in your background. So if you don't want anybody to see anything that they shouldn't be seeing, just make sure that it can't be seen. We are this morning lucky to have Walter Vogler to speak to us. He is a well-known author, and he has spoken to us previously. For those that do not know Walter, he is you may not know him, but he's watching you all the time because he's an expert in credit cards. And so when you use your credit card, he's watching over you to see that nobody's trying to steal your payments. He also runs his own business, and he's written a few books on business, as well as a number of books on the Signals Corps, of which he was a member. He served his time as an officer in the Signals Corps when he had to do his national service. His presentations are well presented, and he's well researched. And today his subject is Hermannsburg Mission, a Lutheran mission to South Africa, established in 1854 in Natal. Without further ado, Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, David. It's an honor for me to be able to present to you all. Thank you for your interest, and also, Alta, thank you for making the arrangements. I really hope that you enjoy the presentation and find it interesting. I have no problem if you want to interrupt me during the presentation, but I will also give a chance at the end of the presentation if you've got any questions. So either way would be fine with me. So today's focus, I think it was a few months ago, presented on the so-called cotton Germans who arrived in Natal in 1848, which I hope you found interesting for those who could join me. Today is about the Hermannsburg Mission. It was established in 1849, so they celebrated the 175th anniversary last year, but the first group of missionaries arrived in Natal in 1854. So I'm going to, again, just provide a bit of context, as I did last time with my Cotton Germans presentation. So for those who did see that, forgive me for a bit of a repetition, but I think it's good to have a bit of context. And then I will dive into the whole work of the Hermannsburg Mission in South Africa after that. So David's already given an introduction, but just to add to that a little bit, I am a descendant of both the Hermannsburg missionaries, and I will share towards the end of my presentation exactly what my connections are, and then also with the Cotton Germans, or the Brahmsha colonists, as we also refer to it. I grew up in Piet Retief in the southeastern Transvaal, and then I went to study in Pretoria, and my career sort of developed from there. So let's just talk about the German immigration to South Africa, just as a bit of a context. There's an estimated about 1.5 million South Africans that are of German descent, and the estimates are about 40% of Afrikaners have German roots. So it is quite a significant pool of genetics, but not just genetics, obviously the culture, the language, the religious influence is quite huge in South Africa. So it's worthwhile having a look to see, what the influence was. And apart from the initial wave of Germans that came in the time of the Dutch East India Company, there were a number of mission societies, some of which I'll just cover just now, and then various waves that came in Eastern Cape, Philippi, the goldfields during the Boer War, and so on. I think we're all very familiar with the the portion of the immigrants that arrived in the early days after Jan van Riebeeck in 1652, a large number of the initial early settlers and colonists in the Cape were of German descent. A lot of them, because of the wars and economic hardships, they were willing to try a new country. As many of them immigrated to America, so a number of them also came to South Africa. And they came from all over the German territories, including even Switzerland, Austria, East Prussia, etc. So I've just listed again a number of the groups that came and what period, just again for some context. And then the German missions in South Africa had a great impact. The earliest were the Moravians. They focused, obviously, at that stage on the Cape Colony because that was long before the Great Trek had taken place. So they were the earliest already coming to the Cape in 1737. It's quite a long time ago. And this established about 23 mission stations and a large number of affiliates. And some of them are very well known. They still exist today, and they've had a great impact on those communities. Then the next one was the Rhenish Mission, which went a little bit further, also into German Southwest Africa. Then the Berlin Mission Society, which I think was by far the biggest. They started working in South Africa in 1834 and stretched across the Cape, but also the Transvaal and Natal areas in those days. So they had a really major impact, and a lot of those families are very well researched. The next one, probably the next biggest, was the Hermannsburg Mission, which will be the focus of our presentation today. So if you look at just the number of mission stations, also about 47, their work was mainly confined to Natal, Zululand, and then later Transvaal, but also Bechuanaland. And then they also went a little bit further than that, but that was their main focus. And they never established any mission stations in the Cape. Then there was also the Swiss and the Hanoverian Church, the Free Hanoverian Church, which is actually an offshoot from the Hermannsburg Mission. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but they had a smaller mission work, but nevertheless also quite important. So if you add the Free Hanoverian Church and the Hermannsburg work, they probably combined had more mission stations than the Berlin Mission. So I'm not going to dive into the Rhenish or the Berlin Mission. I think we've covered them well enough. But just to show you some of the well-known names that many of them became or produced very prominent people in the South African society. If you think of somebody like Louis Leipold, just his name jumps up in the Rhenish context, and then in the Berlin context, I mean, also some very well-known names that we all recognize from, general, I think if you think of the Proteskis, the Parkendorfs, etc., also well-known names. And then the Eastern Cape was a major area of settlement, particularly after the Crimean Wars. A lot of German soldiers fought on the side of the British because, and I'll speak about that a little bit later as well, the kings of Great Britain were also kings of Hanover. So they had very strong German roots and connections, and they attracted a lot of soldiers from various states in the Holy Roman Empire of Germany, which helped the British in their wars against particularly the Russians in those days. And then there were quite a number of waves of settlements in the Eastern Cape. And again, very well-known names that crop up there. Cotton Germans I spoke about last time, so we won't stop here, but there were 42 families on that ship, the Beta, and again, they had a big impact, especially in Natal. Transvaal settlements, mainly during the Goldfields Rush, and then obviously also during the Anglo-Boer War, there was also a German corps. They were probably the second biggest contributors to soldiers on the side of the Boer forces after the Dutch. And then after the Second World War, with the hard times in Europe, including in Germany, a lot of the families lost their lands in the Eastern territories, such as Pomerania, East Prussia, etc. And many of those families settled in South Africa. Some of them even had family connections here already, including in the Eastern Cape, etc. All right, so that's that for context. Now I'm going to focus on the Hermannsburg mission. So I'm going to just give a quick overview, and then I'm going to go into some of the details. So it is called the Hermannsburg mission because the headquarters, where everything started off in, was in Hermannsburg, which is a small town in Germany. It's not a very big place at all. There's a mission seminary there, or a pastor seminary, a theological seminary, and a church. In fact, there are now two prominent churches in the town, one with the normal Lutheran connections, the other one with a free church. And Hermannsburg is in what they call the Lüneburg Heath, which is in Lower Saxony, the state of Lower Saxony in Germany. In the days when the mission started, it was part of the Grand Duchy of Hanover, at one stage a kingdom, but generally in those days it was a Grand Duchy of Hanover. What is very interesting about the Hermannsburg mission is that they had their own ship called the Candace, and I'm going to talk about the ship. I don't know of any other mission society that actually had bought and operated their own ship to transport missionaries. So that's quite something. And you'll see everywhere in their symbols, they've got the picture of a ship. Even if you look at the bottom there, you'll see there's a 175th anniversary of the mission, which started in 1849. And there's a picture of the ship. And then to the right also the Alpha and the Omega with the ship. And that ship is symbolical of the Candace. The mission work started in Africa, mainly Natal initially, and when they got permission, then they moved into Zululand. After that, Bechuanaland, the Western Transvaal, and they went as far as Abyssinia. Later on, they also established mission stations in India, even Australia. There's a Hermannsburg in Australia. I think they call it New Hermannsburg, in the middle of Australia, close to Ayers Rock. So they had a presence there, and then also in the USA, in sort of the upper Midwest states, Missouri, the Buffalo Synod, the Iowa, and the Ohio Synod. So they stretched quite far and wide, but by and large, their focus was on South Africa. So that's by far the biggest component of their mission. So the origins. Let's talk a bit of where it all started. As I said, it started in this little town called Hermannsburg on the Urza River in the Lüneburg Heath, in what was then the kingdom, or in fact, it was probably the Grand Duchy of Hanover. The king of Hanover was also the king of Great Britain. So George I was the first king of Hanover and of Great Britain. when I think the Stuart line in the Great Britain dried up, they turned to the House of Hanover for their future king. And in fact, even the current royal family in Germany is actually from the House of Hanover. It was just in Victoria's time that the two thrones split, because the Hanoverian law did not allow a female to be head of state. So when Queen Victoria became Queen of Great Britain, she was not allowed to be Queen of Hanover, and that's where it split up. She was still of the House of Hanover, but then her husband, uh, um, he was from the House of Saxe-Coburg, and so she adopted his surname. And it's so that's where the royal family sort of became the House of Saxe-Coburg. And during the First World War, they changed that to the House of Windsor. So just some sort of interesting context there. What happened then? There was an evangelical Lutheran church there called the St. Peter and St. Paul Church. And I've got a picture at the bottom left of the church in those days. And their new pastor was a pastor called Louis or Ludwig Harms. And he also worked with his brother Theodore, who later on took over the mission. And under the preaching of Louis Harms, there was a great spiritual revival. He attracted thousands of people from all over Hanover and even more widespread. And many people dedicated their lives to the Lord. And one of the, yeah, I think there's some noise coming through. If you can just put your microphone on mute, please. So there was a great spiritual revival, and part of the revival started with or stimulated a concern for the lost heathens. So they just felt that they can't just be satisfied in following the Lord themselves and preaching in Germany to the fellow countrymen. They felt a great burden to also bring the gospel, the good news, to the lost heathen. And as a result of that, the mission seminary was established in 1849, which was the start of the Hermannsburg mission. The picture on the right is a picture of Louis Harms. That's what he looked like. And at the bottom right, you can see him giving a Bible study, which was during the week, to some of the members of the congregation. They also often had mission conferences. They were very active, and the church was thriving. And after that, the mission was also thrived under his leadership and inspiration. The approach to missions, so their focus was Africa in the initial stage, and I'm going to share with you what the initial mission field target was. But just in terms of the general approach that they used throughout the years was, first of all, to learn the local language, which is obvious. You go there and don't try and teach them your language. You have to learn their language. And in the case of South Africa, it was primarily Zulu and Tswana. And what was striking when I grew up is how everybody that I knew from the previous generation could, in my case, speak Zulu very well. Both my parents spoke Zulu very well. In fact, my father always told me that German was his home language, but his second language was Zulu. So he grew up with Zulu as his second language, obviously on the farm. And then he learned English at school, and only much, much later he learned Afrikaans. So that was sort of the order of learning various languages. And in the Western Transvaal, it probably would have been a little bit different, but that was the case for most of us who grew up in Natal or Southeastern Transvaal. And that was true for most of the ones that I knew, my relatives, aunts and uncles. They could all speak Zulu very fluently. Secondly, they had a very holistic approach. They didn't just build churches and mission stations, but also schools for themselves, but also for the the the, the nations that they gave try to reach for the Lord. And what was also important for them was the evangelical Lutheran doctrine. They obviously believed in it and was believed that it was the right doctrine. So that was a big focus. But also very important was the retention of German identity, culture, and language. So they didn't really, because most of them did mission work in rural areas, they didn't really assimilate sort of with the local, let's call it white population, because it was mainly a rural area. So they generally established their own German Lutheran churches, their own schools, and so formed a very close-knit local community. Obviously, they had contact with the surrounding farmers that might have been English or Afrikaans, but by and large, it was important from the beginning to retain their own culture and language. And then the next aspect was self-sufficiency. So again, from the beginning, the missionaries were not sent out on their own, but they were sent out with support from what they called colonists. And initially, those colonists were also paid by the mission. Later on, they just became independent. But they were there primarily in the early years to assist the missionaries. So the missionaries could focus on the mission work, the spiritual side, and they would then enable them to establish farms and help them with building, with bricklaying, carpentry, and all the other things that are needed to be logistically capable to spread the word. So this was a very big aspect, and you'll see later on when I get to the various families, I will show how big the group was of colonists that came here not as missionaries but as support personnel. The other aspect that was obviously important was getting wives for the missionaries. Some of them came to South Africa with their wives, but many others first came on their own, established the mission work, and when they were ready, they then requested Louis Harms to send them a wife. If they didn't have somebody in mind themselves, they would actually write to the superintendent of the mission and request a wife to be sent. So that's what happened in many cases. And by and large, it seems like those marriages worked out very well. They were very stable families, and it seemed like it was a success. So let me talk about the the mission ship, which is absolutely a fascinating story. The initial objective of the mission was to do mission work amongst the descendants of the Queen of Ethiopia. If you think of the treasurer of that Philip spoke to in the Acts of the Apostles, he came from Abyssinia, and he was sent by his queen, which according to Acts her name was Candace. And so the idea of the first plan of the mission was to send missionaries to this nation, the descendants of Queen Candace, and to sort of represent the gospel to them. They called it the Gala in those days. I don't know where that name comes from, but that was the name they gave this black nation. But they decided then to call the mission ship the Candace, or in German, the Kandata. The ship that they bought was a brig of 120 ton, and it cost about 15,000 thaler, which I've got no idea how much that is in the current euros or whatever, but it must have been quite a sizable amount of money. And they received the funding for that from donations. So it's quite an amazing endeavor, which just showed the strength of the revival that they're experiencing in Hermannsburg at the time. The investiture of the ship was in September 1853 in Harburg, one of the sort of port cities in northern Germany. And they had a variety of captains over the course of the time that the mission ship traveled. And there were in total 14 voyages, which carried primarily missionaries, but also the farmers and artisans that accompanied them and their wives. Sometimes children also came on the ship. I've got a full list of the passengers that were on each one of these voyages. It was eventually sold in 1875. It was deemed no longer economically viable. And then after that, the missionaries and the farmers and the wives traveled on normal commercial vessels that came to South Africa. By then, there was far more regular ship travel to Natal and the Cape, etc., but primarily to the Natal. And so it was actually cheaper and more viable to get a passage on board one of those ships. So at the bottom is just a few photos of what the ship looked like. In fact, there's a few others. The one on the bottom right is when they dedicated the ship in the harbor after it had been built. So there are quite a number of diaries written by either missionaries or their wives of the time that the experience that they had on board the ship, what happened there, and sometimes they were in storms and in doldrums, and sometimes one or two of the sailors would be washed overboard, and yeah, so it was quite exciting to read about what happened on board the ship and who the passengers were. So yes, let's talk about the first missionaries in Zululand. So the idea when they first launched the mission station is to find new mission fields. So they didn't want to, I think that's the reason why they didn't go to the Cape, because as we saw, there were a number of mission societies that were already busy in the Cape that had been there for quite a long time. By the time it was the middle of the 19th century. So they wanted to find a new mission field. And they decided that they would target the Ethiopians, or the Galas, as I mentioned to you, the land of the Queen Candace, which they knew about from the treasurer that was baptized by the evangelist Philip, as recorded in Acts 8, verse 27. So that was the target. They felt that they want to reach out to them again. So the first trip of the Candace took place in 1853, and the target was in Ethiopia. It left Hamburg on the 28th of October with 16 passengers on board, which is not a big amount of people, but that's what it was. It arrived in Cape Town in January. By March, it arrived in Port Natal. And interestingly enough, this is when they were in Port Natal for the first time, obviously very strange experience for them. They suddenly, while they were on the harbor, they heard the sound of a brass band. And they went to investigate, because brass bands are very common in Germany. It's part of the culture and tradition. And that's where they met some of the descendants of the Bergtal colonists, or the cotton Germans that I spoke about last time. So that was where the first connection came. So they found some local Germans. When the Germans heard that they were en route on their way to Abyssinia or to Ethiopia, they said, well, why don't you do mission work among the Zulus? And that's where the seed was planted, to do mission work among the Zulus. But anyway, they said, no, our target is Ethiopia. and we are going to continue onwards to Ethiopia to try and open up the mission field there. So the ship sailed on up the coast to Zanzibar, first of all, where they spoke to the Sultan, or tried to get audience with the Sultan and get his permission to stop in Mombasa, and then from there go inland. They stayed there between April and May 1854, in fact, probably even longer, trying to get permission. Remember, the Sultan was a Muslim, Arab. They owned their territory mainly for slavery, so they were extracting slaves from the area. And as you can imagine, they never managed to get permission to do mission work there. In fact, they were warned not to attempt that at all. So after many months of trying, they had to eventually give up. So they traveled back down to Port Natal, and in August 1854, remember, there were no emails or cell phones or faxes or telephones or anything like that. So they could not sort of reach the mission board, the leadership, Pastor Louis Harms, to ask what they should do. But they then decided to take the initiative, and they left a number of missionaries in Port Natal to start the mission work. And the idea was to start in Natal first, and then to requisition the Zulu King if they could maybe establish a mission station there as well. The rest of the crew and some of the missionaries then returned to Germany, where they obviously related what had transpired. The picture at the bottom is just what Port Natal looked like in those early days. The second trip was a few years later, in 1857-58, which is when a new group was sent. I think by that stage, they agreed that they would focus their mission work on Zululand and Natal, but they still sent 6 of the missionaries on to Ethiopia to try again, but it failed. The third trip was in 1861, and there was a third attempt to reach Ethiopia, which also failed. They continued on and off to try and open up that mission field, but they only succeeded after the First World War. In fact, prior to the Second World War, in 1827-28, that was the first time they succeeded in getting permission to send a few missionaries there. So in the meantime, the focus had shifted to Natal and Zululand. So as I said, the first missionaries arrived it was actually, June, July. It was actually in August, I think, 1854, after the failed attempt in Ethiopia. They'd met the Brahmsha colonists there, and they were introduced to the Reverend Carl Willem Posselt of the Berlin Missionary Society, who was the pastor of the Cotton Germans. And he said it was he that really suggested that they try to do some work amongst the Zulus and open up a new mission field there. The first mission station that they established was called Hermannsburg in Natal. So they didn't establish it in Zululand because they had no permission. Hermannsburg is sort of probably close to Wartburg, New Hanover, sort of a little bit north of Durban, Dalton, that area. Very, very small town, but a very beautiful church and a lovely school. And there's a museum there that is absolutely worth having a look at. So if you ever get into the area, take the time to stop and have a look at the church and the museum there. The picture at the bottom is a picture of the first house that was built in typical sort of style of Hanover or Lower Saxony. That's sort of very common of the kind of farmhouses that they had in that part of northern Germany. Then they decided to seek permission from Mpanda, who was the Zulu king at the time, through the Norwegian Lutheran missionary H.P. Schroeder, which they eventually got, but there were big limitations on it. But over time, they started establishing a number of mission stations there. So I think just an overview again of the early settlements in Natal and Zululand. The first recorded documented settlement was 1832. 1839, the Voortrekkers established the Republic of Italia, and so on until 1843, when Natal was proclaimed a British Crown colony. And you will remember that, as I said, the Hanoverians were linked to the German royal family through their king. So there was a very cordial relationship between, at a sort of very governmental royal level, between the British Crown and the Hanoverians. So there weren't any sort of political issues as a result of that. In 1848, the Cotton Germans arrived, and then in June 54, the Hermannsburg missions. Conditions in Natal and Zululand were very, very difficult in those early days. There was virtually no infrastructure. I mean, there was no road building. There was no electricity. There was sort of no water pipes and all these kind of things, the things that we take for granted and demand to be in good working order. In those days, there was none of that. They were completely on their own. They were obviously also not used to the hot and humid climate. There were unknown diseases. There was skilled labor force. They're not used to working. The Zulus especially were a warlike nation at the time. They'd just come through the wars of Chaka and Dingaan. So they were not really keen to do any manual labor. It was really left to the women. So it was the women that sort of tilled the fields and grew the crops. And there were obviously great financial pressures as well. And there were the Zulu civil wars. And again, if you read some of the diaries of the early missionaries, it was very dangerous because they often were caught in the middle of some of these extensive civil wars between the warring parties in Zululand. In fact, in the diary of my great-great-grandfather, you often hear how they had to hide refugees in the mission house to try and protect them from being killed. And they were often surrounded by these warring factions and demanded food and all kinds of things. Fortunately, they weren't killed, but they were definitely in great danger. Then there was the big Anglo-Zulu War of 1879. Obviously, soon after that, the First Anglo-Boer War, which also had an effect on the mission work that they were busy with. All right, so subsequent to these early missionaries, this arrival of these early ones, there were a number of waves of missionary settlements in the early years up to 1872. They all came with the Candace, after that with other ships. But already in 1857, there was a request from the Tswana king, Sechele, for missionaries to come to Bechuanaland. The mission work in that area was started by Robert Moffat in Kuruman, and he was succeeded by his son-in-law, David Livingston. And it was through David Livingston that the king was actually baptized. And so he was keen on his nation being taught the Christian gospel and teachings. And so he invited the Hermannsburg mission to send missionaries to Bechuanaland and what later became the Western Transvaal. So between 1854 and 1936, 143 missionaries came to South Africa. There were 15 colonists specifically there to support the missionaries, but then subsequent to that, also 274 farmers and artisans. So by far the biggest group was actually non-missionaries, but they were there to support the mission and build, let's call it the community. So in total, 787 people that came to South Africa during that period as missionaries. Subsequent to 36, obviously, it was a bit of a break during the Second World War, but after the war, individuals were still sent to continue mission work, although a large part of the mission work was done by the descendants of the initial missionaries and colonists that came to South Africa. So these are just some of the names of the mission stations. I've got some of the names at the top of the mission stations, Ehlanzeni, but there's many, many more. I've just sort of highlighted some of the dates of some of the mission stations and when they were established. The picture of the church, sort of at the center bottom, is at a place called Ekuhlengeni, which was established in 1868 by my great-great-grandfather. He was first at Ehlanzeni, which was established in 1856. But after that, he moved to Ekuhlengeni, and he actually built that the church and had his own house close by. He later died of malaria because they built sort of water furrows all over the mission station, and I think they didn't realize that the mosquitoes carrying malaria were breeding in those water furrows. So he eventually died of malaria. But that was his last mission station, which is not far from Vryheid. The closest German Lutheran church to Ekuhlengeni is a small church called Glückstadt, which is where my grandfather was baptized. So that's sort of all in the area of northern Zululand and Natal. And then there's a whole lot of mission stations that were established also in Transvaal in various years. Then, as I mentioned, they also established many German Lutheran churches, and I just list a few of them in Natal and Transvaal that were specifically established by the Hermannsburg missionaries, and some of them then became pastors. Some of them were both pastors to the German congregations and missionaries to the Zulus or the Tswanas. Later on, some of them became, especially if the congregations became quite big, some of them were then dedicated pastors as well to the German congregation. So these are just some of the sort of well-known German congregations that all still have beautiful church buildings, and that it's actually very worthwhile doing a trip to have a look at these churches. Many of them are out in the countryside. Some of them are in towns, but many of them are out in the countryside, and they've got schools attached to them. So where you see an asterisk specifically, there are schools like Hermannsburg's got a very good school. Wittenberg's got a good primary school. A lot of them had their own schools, but they later on, and because of transport, the children would go to school there. But because of better transport these days, not many of them still have schools, except the ones that I've shown with asterisks here. I think it was last year, I published together with a cousin of mine a reference guide to all the German churches in South Africa, the Lutheran churches. It was in fact the Lutheran churches and congregations, not just the Hermannsburg, but also the free churches and those that were built by the Berlin missionaries. So I published a sort of reference guide of all those churches when they were established, who the pastors were, pictures of the church, etc. But the pictures below just give you an idea of the style of architecture that we used. They're absolutely beautiful and really worthwhile seeing. All right, so some of the well-known names of missionaries. I've just sort of extracted some of the names there's a longer list than this, but this is just some of the well-known names that you might recognize. You'll see Volker there in the sort of second last. That was my great-great-grandfather, and you will see him also in this group of missionaries that was taken during a missionary conference at Hermannsburg in Natal. And the names of all these missionaries are known. My great-great-grandfather is sort of, let's see, fourth from, in the front row, fourth from the right. So it was remarkable that they often took group photos. They were very intent on that, even family photos. So one of the heritages that we can be grateful for is all these pictures. They were obviously all very literate, so they wrote diaries and reports and things like that. So the family histories are very well recorded, and it's sort of very rich, which we can be grateful for. Some of the colonists, farmers, artisans, names are here. Again, also well-known names. Well, certainly to me, I probably personally would know individuals from each one of these families. Went to school with some of them, still have contact with some of them. So they had a great impact on society and obviously my personal life as well. So the legacy, just talk about that. The spiritual legacy obviously is by far the biggest. So today, the German Lutheran churches are primarily organized in two groups: the ELKSA, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church, or Kirche in German, in South Africa, ELKSA, which is where the sort of main Hermannsburg, and let's call it the Berlin German churches sort of are organized under. One of my cousins was married to one of the bishops. Bishop Lilia is married to my cousin. So they've got a bishop in various synods. So he was the bishop for Natal and Transvaal. There's also Cape Synod and so on. And then there's Valsisa, which has got a bit of a history to it. It's a Free Evangelical Lutheran Church synod in Southern Africa, or South Africa. So Valsisa. In 1890, there was a split in Germany in the Evangelical Lutheran Church community, resulting in the Free Lutheran Synod, and which in South Africa became Valsisa. So that is a very unfortunate split, but that's the reality. And that's why in Hermannsburg, Germany, you've got two Lutheran churches in the same town. And the same is true in many of the small towns and areas, even rural areas in southeastern Transvaal and Natal. So you would find in a town like Piet Retief or Vryheid, you would find both ELKSA, or normal Lutheran church, and a Free Lutheran church. Their doctrine's very similar, if not the same, but they've got historical differences. So that's how it is. The symbol that you see on the right there with the ship is actually the logo of ELKSA, and that ship there is obviously the campus. So if you're wondering, and then the Luther Rose just below it. So it gives you the mission thing and then the Lutheran connection. The mission is the Evangelical Lutheran Mission in Southern Africa, and there's still strong connections to Germany. In fact, it gets managed out of Germany, so that still plays a key and active role. On the social cultural side, a lot of the towns were influenced greatly by the descendants. Schools were established. In fact, I think Hermannsburg had one of the oldest, if not the oldest, school in Natal. And as far as I know, it's the oldest school cadet corps that was established in Natal. So they've got an incredibly rich history. And obviously, the farming community is strongly influenced by German farmers. In Natal, sugarcane farming in sort of southeastern Transvaal, wattle and pine forestry, etc. And then on the economic front, obviously also contribution to South Africa in terms of the various careers that the descendants followed. And it's probably not necessary to go into individuals, but there's certainly a very good contribution. They are known as hardworking, dedicated, disciplined people of high moral standards and integrity. So that's a great heritage. So my own links to the family. What is just a quick story. I went to Germany for the first time when I was 18. I'd finished, no, in fact, I was 20. I finished university and I went to America first. After America, I stayed in America for a year. Then I traveled in Europe and I'd landed in Frankfurt and was going to take a train up to my relatives in Hanover. And when I got onto the train, I asked the conductor if I was on the right train. And he immediately asked me, "Oh, you must be from Hanover." So it was very interesting that my German accent at that stage still had a Hanoverian aspect to it after so many years. So obviously, that culture, language, customs are very strong embedded if you grew up in that environment. Over the years, recently, it's become a little bit more diluted because most people marry English or Afrikaans wives or other way around. And so it becomes a bit diluted, but it's still quite strong in some of the environments. So my own ancestry is on my father's side. Volker, the missionary Volker came to Natal, Zululand in 1858. That's my great-great-grandfather. And then I'm also related to the Rutger family. The missionary Rutger came in 1862. And then also on my father's side, I'm related to the Brahmsha colonists through the Turlers, which was my granny, and the Ollemans. Her mother was an Olleman. And then on my mother's side, her mother, so my granny on my mother's side, was a dedicant who was also a missionary, Hermannsburg missionary in 1866. On my mother's side, a more recent immigrant was Heinrich Staats. He was not a missionary. He was just a more normal sort of immigrant to South Africa. He married my granny, who was a dedicant. So my ancestor chart is there also. It's a little bit of an eye test, so that I don't expect you to read that. But that sort of shows you what my personal link is into the missionary community and also the cotton German environment. These are just some family photos. Top left is missionary Volker with his wife. In fact, he had two wives. The sort of just below it, the one on the left is his first wife. I think she had about 5 or 6 children and she passed away. And then her sister came, Elizabeth came. She was Augusta. Her sister then came to look after the children, and then eventually they got married. And she survived him for many years afterwards, after he died of malaria. I think it was in 1895. And she stayed in the little cottage in Glückstadt for many years thereafter. She also had about 5 children. And then the picture on the top right is of my grandparents, Ferdinand Volker and Maria Turler. And then at the bottom right is just a family photo when I was about 4 years old. So that was about in 1962. In the middle, also family photo. So we've got literally hundreds of these photos of family get-togethers and things like that. This is also families, my grandfather and his brothers and sisters, and my granny Turla as a child. You can see the little girl on the lap of her father is, no, in fact, the one on the mother's arm with a long sort of probably christening dress. That was my granny. All right. I think that's it. That's the story of the Hermannsburg mission. I hope it gives you a good impression of their contribution, what they're all about. Just a few closing remarks. I've developed a database of German descendants, which is about 90,000 individuals. So if you're looking for anybody that has got German roots, particularly from the 19th and 20th century. Prior to that, I would say it's probably better to look in the Cape archives. I'm also not as strong on the Eastern Cape Germans. I've got some of the families, but my strength is more Natal, Transvaal, etc. Maybe a little bit broader here and there, but if you're interested, you're very welcome to contact me. Some of the great sources that we have on the Hermannsburg missions is what we call the missionary reports. They started in 1858, and there are some people that have got bound sets going from 1858 right up to the 1930s. They're very comprehensive, and they give sort of almost month by month update on what happened in the various mission stations. They're absolutely amazing. There is somebody who's trying to digitize them at the moment, Heinz Kuzel. So he's trying to digitize these, but I've got a photocopy set of all the mission reports. And then there were missionary letters. So each missionary had to write, I think it was something like once a month, to the superintendent. They called him the mission father, Louis Harms. They had to write a report on how it's going on the mission station, excuse me. And fortunately, I was able to also get copies of the letters that were sent by my great-great-grandfather of conditions on the mission station at that stage. So they're absolutely stunning. Then the various German congregations also wrote newsletters of births, deaths. So apart from the church records, which are very well kept with baptisms, marriages, deaths, all these kind of things, there were also these congregational newsletters of what's happening in the various congregations and who was born or christened and died and all these things. So if you can get a hold of one of those, you can get good summaries. And that really helped me to sort of build out my database. And then there were numerous diaries. There was also, if you look at the bottom right, of Schwerin Posten in Zululand, that was translated into English on a tough missionary post in Zululand. That's the sort of story of my great-great-grandfather, the work that he did there, the Anglo-Zulu Wars, the Zulu Civil Wars, and how tough it was to do mission work there. So it's great to have one of those documents to refer to. And then I also post, this is a picture of the reference guide that we compiled on all the German churches and mission stations in South Africa, Southern Africa, and South Africa. So that we published last year. And then I also have got a sort of list of published genealogies of some of the German families, apart from the Cotton Germans, which I told you last time, the one on the top left. And then the other images are just some of the other books. It's certainly not complete, but some of the other books that are published. So the three there are of the Corps of Signals, and then the Boer War stories of the Piet Retief Commander. So just to give you an idea of that. David, that's my story.
David, can I ask a question? Croaky voice.
Of course.
Nigel.
Yes, Nigel.
I appreciated the presentation for one reason, well, number of reasons, but one was the breadth and depth of the support of the communities, I'm going to say back home in Germany. Was it, and I don't know how to phrase this politely, was it the normal people in the congregation which supported the missionaries? Or was it the lords and ladies of the manors?
No,
If I
that's a
get
good question. Yeah, Nigel, I understand the question fully. And the answer is very clearly that it was the normal people, because they always refer to them as a farming community. So they obviously, in fact, when the missionaries were sent out, the King of Hanover insisted on blessing them. He was a big supporter, but he didn't really support them financially, nor did the lords and ladies support them financially. It was the normal church-going people in the congregation that gave out of their hard-earned. And I mean, as you know, in those days there wasn't a rich middle class. They were primarily farmers and rural folk, and it was them that gave generously out of their hard-earned cash. So certainly not. They didn't have sort of rich, noble families that sponsored these ventures. Yeah.
And perhaps a follow-up question, then the churches that you showed pictures of, they're not, and again, excuse my English, cattle stables. Those are substantial buildings,
Yeah.
which must have A, needed designing, B, and in today's terminologies, architects and what have you. It wasn't a lean-to in the corner of the field. Um, how soon after the establishment of a mission station did the church get put up, or is this something that happened 20 years later?
Yeah, I think the initial structures were not as beautiful as some of the photos you've seen, and even some of the German churches started as more rudimentary structures, but over time, most of them were rebuilt into the beautiful structures you see today. So it was a process. So it wasn't like from day one, like in 1880 or something, you wouldn't have had the ability to build those beautiful structures. A lot of them were sort of rebuilt probably in the early 1900s. So they're not quite, yeah, some of them might already be 100 years old. In fact, there are some of them celebrated their centenary anniversary, but obviously they didn't start like that.
Where do you keep all these diaries that you've been reading?
Yeah, I know. I've got a very big library. So I've got a collection of all the congregations. When they sort of reach a certain anniversary, they publish a history of the congregation. So I collect all of those. So I've got a very extensive library of diaries and church chronicles and things like that, even copies of church registers. But I think the Hermannsburg Mission Museum has got a very extensive collection as well. Include obviously books, diaries, all those things, but also of artifacts, things that they used on the farms and old Bibles. So it's obviously Hermannsburg's not accessible to everybody, but if you are in the vicinity of Dalton, Wartburg, that area, it's absolutely worthwhile going there. And they've got a very good website as well. If you look on Facebook, in fact, I think it's a Facebook page. If you just sort of check out on Facebook, the Hermannsburg Museum, you will see they share lots of photos and information on there.
Curious and fascinated about conditions on the ocean voyage. I've seen the model of the ship at the museum in Hermannsburg, and there don't seem to be any portholes. Where did the people live and sleep It mean it must have been a rough voyage and rough conditions.
Yeah, right. No, I agree with you. I actually didn't think about that, but it's a very good point. There is no portholes. So I think they slept below deck, but lived on top of the deck. And I think it was very rough. I mean, you had to be tough, especially if you're a lady in those kind of conditions. And when you read some of the diaries, it was very tough. In fact, on a few occasions, I think some of the children died. So you'd often see, and in fact, some of them were born on the ship. So there were births and deaths on the ship during the voyage. But I think, I mean, for us modern people used to our comforts in five-star hotels, I think it was very, very difficult to travel on those kind of ships. And obviously seasickness and, all kinds of things. Yeah, I think it was very bad.
And the clothes that they wore.
Yeah.
They,
right.
they didn't wear jeans.
Yes, exactly. And they
All
had
right, thank you.
these hot European clothes. So I think when they came to Natal, it must have been quite difficult especially for the ladies again, to move around with these huge dresses that were so very hot.
The 40% German descent in the Afrikaners, how did you get that amount?
It's sort of mainly from calculations, probably going back to the old, Dutch East India Company days. I think there was quite a bit of research done, going back from hearsay and all those kind of guys that claim that was about the percentage. How accurate it is, Stefan, I wouldn't know, but that's sort of the general sort of figure that I've seen a few times.
Walter, thank you very much for a most professional presentation. We all enjoyed it a lot. I can see from the number of questions, it was well done, as I said before, and certainly it brings an insight to a different part of the country from where we are in the Cape. We've always been Cape people, and our descendants all stayed in the Cape. It's always nice to know how the other people have gone around the place. I know you mentioned the Rhenish missionaries. My great-grandfather, he was a padre in the Anglican Church. I know he had something to do with the Rhenish Society in Stellenbosch and establishing a piece of ground for them. I don't know how, I haven't really researched and I can't find any details about it, but I just know it was mentioned. But thank you very much. Your presentation will be available on YouTube. We will post it and it will be advertised through GGSA notices. But thank you once again very much for a most enjoyable and informative talk.